Jackson Smith-Njigba, Trey McBride, De'Von Achane, highly coveted players, first-round picks in dynasty startup drafts, and they may well finish as the wide receiver 1, tight end 1, and running back 1, respectively. But is now actually the time to trade them away? My guest today is NerdBoi Takes himself, Mike Lamoureux, and he's going to talk about the idea of tiering down and gaining additional value for producing assets right now. And here's the catch. That's not just a strategy for rebuilders, but contenders can also take advantage of this approach. And we're going to go really deep into that next on Dynasty Compass. Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I'm your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B. from Football Guys. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. You are the reason that we are here, trying to help you become a better dynasty manager. And I've got a great guest to do exactly that today. You probably know him as NerdBoi, but I know him as Mike Lamoureux. He is joining me today from Dynasty Degens. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Jeff, I appreciate you having me on, man. I'm excited to talk some dynasty, some tiers. I like the show sheet that you sent over, and I think that it's going to be a great show. So I appreciate you having me on for sure.
We think about tiers. We're thinking about guys in the same tier, and we're warned not to stray from that tier because you risk losing value. But that's really just part of the story. There's a more sophisticated way of looking at it, and I think that you have really hit onto that. When we talk about tiering down, what does that mean to you, and why is it sometimes a better way to gain dynasty value than staying in the tier that you're looking at?
So that's the thing, you have to look at the landscape. Tiers to me come with time. I don't think that you can go in a dynasty immediately and just have a tiered system in place and understand, the ceiling of this player is equivalent to the ceiling and the floor is equivalent to the floor. It's a really hard thing to adjust to. And like I said, it's adjusted over time and things change and shift. But once you kind of have your own value system in place, there becomes a way to gain value or to stay at the same level by also kind of getting a future asset, or, I call it insulated trades. And when you make an insulated trade, you're essentially selling production for production that is similar while also gaining value. So, taking a CeeDee Lamb about 4 or 5 years ago and trading them for an Amon-Ra St. Brown ++, or, trading a CD for a Puka that first year and getting a couple first on top. There are ways that can really benefit you. You can also have it blow up in your face, but at the same time, that insulation is what makes that worth it, because you are getting X amount of chances on top of the production. So you're taking a chance that this guy is going to produce similar to that guy. But if he doesn't, you're insulating that value and you're saying, all right, I have another chance to take another shot here. I have another chance to get another shot, essentially. Or if you hit right, you have the same guy.
Right.
And then you also have a first-round pick. Once you actually think about a trade in a long-term lens, you have traded CeeDee Lamb for Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. You got Jaden Daniels somehow. And it's like, you can keep going down the line a little bit. And it's so fun. Sometimes when I'm bored, I will look at old dynasty leagues and I'll just look at a trade. And then I'll do the math and say, this is what this became, and that's what that became. And it's fun. And that's how I nerd out sometimes when I'm looking at, if I want to look at a value thread or make content, I'll look at old leagues and I'll just say, this is the best trade that I've ever made. This is the worst trade I've ever made. But this is how you get out of bad trades. And it's very possible people give up too soon in Dynasty.
The more chances you get, even on a what turns out to be a bad trade, you may still end up at the end with the best asset in the trade. It just may take some time for that to work its way out. But one of the beauties of Dynasty is you actually do have that time. In redraft, you make a bad trade, kills you for the season, then it's over. But you never get to know the benefit that might have come for that. If that player does eventually become better, you no longer have him because it's redraft and not dynasty. When did you realize that there was an edge here that you could apply to just about every dynasty trade or league that you have, and it was an edge you had over the other guys in your league who weren't thinking along these kinds of lines?
I think it was really like when I got into scouting and understanding player development and getting into like contracts and, offensive coordinators and just kind of taking all of that and making it a clear picture. I had always an idea of like, good offensive coordinators' impact on a player or the contract of a player giving you longevity and making you a player that's going to actually withstand value. But then it kind of clicked maybe like 5-6 years ago where I realized, I could look at a value system or a value chart. And even if you look at ADP, you can kind of take a look at it and you can say, all right, Amon-Ra St. Brown and JSN, they're about 8 picks apart right now. And realistically, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown could eclipse JSN's production. So last year, you could have traded, Amon-Ra St. Brown for JSN plus. This year, I want to trade JSN for Amon-Ra St. Brown plus. And that's really the value game that you have to play. And there's a risk attached to it, but you have to look at regression. You have to look at the team breakdown. You have to look at how they have moved on, like Kubiak's gone off of that team. There's definitely a lot of factors. And it's really, you're playing weatherman. I'm not telling you that there's a sure bet that you're going to actually hit on these value systems, but you do have to look at multiple faceted factors, and you have to try to look at every outcome of that player and understand, like for instance, a Trey McBride. He has had, coming off one of the most productive tight end seasons ever, had the most receptions of any Cardinal ever at this point, and not we're just talking tight ends, we're talking about wide receivers.
Everybody.
And it's just not sustainable in my mind because of the way that they've kind of moved as a team. They've moved coaching. They essentially said, we're going to go spend massive DC on a running back.
Yeah.
And the team that had the least amount of balance last year when it came to running and passing, we're talking about a team that just spent top 5 DC on a running back.
Yeah.
Everyone is gone. All these new coaches, this whole system is gone. If Jeremiah Love isn't producing this year, some capacity, we have to say they're going to run the ball more. They're going to have more of a balanced attack. And that leads me to believe that Trey McBride is a sell. And then I look down the line and I look at everyone that's behind him, Colston Loveland, even Brock Bowers in some circles is behind McBride when it comes to ADP. I play ADP like a fiddle, and I just say, well, I want to go get Loveland. I'm going to see if I can make an insulated trade. If I can get Loveland plus for McBride right now, I don't think it's possible, but I think that maybe in some circles you can get a little second or, upgrade at the running back or the wide receiver position. There's no direct science to this, but I think you have to look at factors and make educated guesses. And I won't tell people that I'm going to be right 1,000%, but I mean, even if I'm right 50% of the time on one team, I'm going to make probably return on investment like immediately. 50% of the time, you're still going to hit on a lot of starters, and that's still going to result in at least a competitive team. So I think that there is a game to be played, but I won't always say that there's a specific game that you can play when it comes to tiering.
Do you tend to do these kinds of insulated trades within the same position? We've done a lot of comparisons within a position just in the last little bit, like, JSN versus Amon-Ra St. Brown or McBride versus Loveland. Or do you like go outside of positions and try to make more trades that way? Which way do you tend to operate in, or is it kind of either or?
It does make sense when it comes to positional tier downs. I think that it's a lot easier to say, I think that Zay Flowers is going to make a jump this year. And I think that somebody like JSN is going to regress this year, and I want to try to move JSN for Flowers plus. If I can trade him, Matt Stafford and JSN for Flowers, and I don't know who you could get at that point. Like if you could get maybe probably not going to get a Drake May, but like you can get a significant bump at quarterback. But you can also look at it in the sense that in Dynasty, the windows of operation and in value are longer when it comes to certain positions. Like the quarterbacks and the wide receivers stay high in ADP longer than the running backs. Like you can look at guys like Jonathan Taylor, and they're still producing at the level of somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but they're never going to be valued as an Amon-Ra St. Brown just because there are running backs and they are going to drop a little faster. And, a 26-year-old running back is not valued the same as a 26-year-old wide receiver. So if I can take a 26-year-old running back that still looks good and is producing and will produce, and no doubt you might be taking a loss in value for a little while, but you have to be okay with that. You have to understand that every trade's not going to be, hey, I'm winning the league this year, but like ultimately you want to sell before the window closes, and you want to get off of these players like the guys that were valued in the second round just 4 years ago. Like De'Bo Samuel was honestly a 4th round draft pick in 2024, I think, or 2023. We're not going too far back right now. He's undrafted. No. A lot of the times you go into a best ball league or you go into redraft and De'Bo's not even taken. So Cooper Kupp was in the 3rd round in 2024, 2023. I'm sorry if I'm getting the year wrong, but we're not going too far back on these guys, and they're obsolete at this point. I mean, they are so far. You could have traded Tyreek Hill about 2 years ago for the farm. You could have traded him for 3 firsts. And it wasn't that long ago. I'm talking 2024. Tyreek Hill was valued as a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty. And you just have to understand that, some players aren't built for longevity. If you rely on speed, if you are reliant on pure speed, you are a sell the second you're 27, 28. And you just have to go in on that. But you have to understand their skill sets, like a De'Bo Samuel, like hyper usage and used out of the backfield. That's not sustainable. I think the sustainability is something that I hammer home to people because you have to look at usage and understand that, this isn't going to be a forever thing. This is because we need it right now kind of thing. So there's I'm going all over the board right now, but I hope I answered some sort of question right there.
Yeah, you certainly did, and I think sustainability is there. But you've also hit on, I think, the big hang up that a lot of dynasty managers, and even I run into this too. Let's use JSN as an example, or Trey McBride, either one of them. They're coming off of historic seasons essentially, and to take that asset right now and trade that away, you're thinking this is a value hit now, regardless of what it's going to do for me in the future. I don't want to let go of that value now, or I'm not going to get the farm back for this guy. I'm only going to get maybe a little bit of extra value down the line. How do you talk someone out of the fear of doing that, of trading a JSN right now for players who are good but not producing at the level he just produced at? And a future draft pick or a rising star who may be 2 or 3 years away from being anything to you.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. This has to be the right trade. I'm not necessarily advocating that you trade JSN right now just because he fits just about any build. Like even if you're in a rebuild in Dynasty, JSN is still somebody that I want on my team. He's not somebody that's going to age out or completely lose value. But if you can get like an Amon-Ra St. Brown plus for JSN, there are moves where I'm going to say just jump on those because, you're looking at 2 similar tiered players, and I think that they're both going to contribute to their team in the same manner, have the same outlook as far as Dynasty goes, and they're not moving off of each other, but you're also getting value plus. A McBride, to me, I think that tight ends are easier for me because we don't see them outside of the likes of Gronk and Kelsey and select few. They do wane and they do have kind of a up and down type of trajectory a lot of the times. I don't think McBride's going to fall out of the top 5 producers by any means, but right now he's considered a top 1 in tight ends when it comes to production, especially after last year. I think that that's a sell high moment. And I think that you do have to take advantage of that. It's not going to be for anybody, but I'm talking about trading these top tier guys for rising or, almost linear assets, but you have to use the hype and you have to use the fact that they just had the wide receiver 1 or tight end 1 numbers last year. It's just so hard to repeat that, Like, I'm not saying he's not going to be top 5. I'm not going to say that JSN at his age and the way that he produced last year is going to regress completely. But I think that he's going to get closer to that second round tier of wide receivers than he is that first round tier of wide receivers. I mean, somebody like Justin Jefferson is out of the first round for the first time since his rookie year.
Yeah.
He is somebody that you can target big time for these tiered down trades. If you can get Justin Jefferson in a first for JSN right now, I think that I do that in a heartbeat. I think that we're looking at a team that just lost its OC, and I think that we're still going to see production, but I think you're looking at guys that we've already seen produce for long periods of time. And ultimately, if you can get the value on top, and really the fact that the quarterback probably is the only thing holding back somebody from becoming, that top 3 wide receiver again, I'm going to make that chance. I'm going to take that bet. And I think that you all have to understand that some of these trades aren't going to feel great at the moment. But I think that if you are in need of depth or you're in need of a revamp on your team, just knocking on the door and just checking the value of your players, because every league is different, and understanding that, if you can take advantage of insulated trade at that moment, just jump over and try to do it, man. I think that it's not going to be pretty. And I hope that the takeaway from this is sell JSN, because it's not. So don't think of it that way, please.
I was just thinking about, if you through that lens of McBride, but particularly JSN right now, if you're a dynasty manager that's been playing for a long time and you've had Travis Kelce on your team for the last 10 years, you've probably reached that point where you're like, man, I should have traded him about 2 or 3 seasons ago. That's kind of what we're talking about, right? Is understanding where that moment is in real time, whether it is immediate because they're coming off historic seasons like the guys we've been talking about, or we've got a vet who's been performing at a high level for a long time, maybe a Jonathan Taylor. What is step 1 to understanding that moment might be here for somebody that's on your roster right now?
I think that once their first contract is over, you already have to be thinking about how many contracts does this player have right now. When you look at a player in the sense, okay, they're coming in, were they drafted at a young age? Were they drafted older? They were likely 22, 23. Their first contract ends when they're 25, 26. At 26, do I start questioning their value a little bit? Yes. I mean, for a running back, big time, because that second contract is probably their last contract unless they start signing 1-year deals. And even then, it's like you want to take the production, but you also understand that after that second contract hits, that value is already going to be sliding a little bit, So I think that it is. So contracts, age, all factor into it. I think that people understand a player moves from a different team and they're just not the same player. Or, like if by chance I will try to target these certain guys that I think are on the last year of their contracts. Like Nico Collins is falling out of favor right now. I don't think they have the money to sign him to a long-term contract. I think that I want to take a stab at Nico Collins later in this year. And he's a sell in a lot of communities at the time, but he's also becoming a buy. So I think that contract's a big thing. I also think that the team layout is huge. You have to look at like somebody like De'Von Achane. I want to sell him all day. His value this year, he might be the entire offense.
Yeah.
And that's cool. And he just signed a good second contract. He got the contract extension. Get rid of Achane right now. If you can move him for a top tier running back, like with some plus on top, I'm doing it. Like Achane, trade him for Amari and Hampton, or somebody in their first year contract, trade him for Travion Henderson in a first. Whatever you can really muster right now, you understand that these guys are still going to produce. They're still going to be one of the top running backs in the league, but you have to bite the bullet and say their value is never going to exceed what it is right now. Miami is so far away from production. Miami,
yes.
He's the Jonathan Taylor right now. And Jonathan Taylor is still producing at a high level, but he also isn't sniffing second round value anymore. And next year, he won't be sniffing fourth round value. And he's still going to be going down. So you have to think, all right, they've been rising. You have to look at contract breakdown and layout of the team and say that Achane is probably done rising. This is probably the highest he's ever going to be right now. And I think I want to move him for somebody that still is going to rise. Like Travion Henderson, not done rising. I'm okay with getting plus on Travion Henderson for Achane right now, just because I know that they're going to meet in the middle at some point. And I think that Travion will jump him in value at some point too. While Achane's going down, these guys are going up. So you kind of have to look at it in that sense. All right, who already produced? Who is still on their first contract? Who's on their second contract? Who's at the level where they're never going to go up again? And this is the guessing game. This is really what you have to do. Can Achane like suddenly jump even more in value? I don't think so. Personally, I think he can come out and be the RB1 this year. Yep. And I think he still is going to stay exactly where he is next year, and that's kind of like what you have to do. You have to say there's no exceeding of value for this dynasty player, but I also see guys behind him that can jump up into this tier. So then you have to play that game of, all right, I know that they're still going to produce. I understand that there's still going to be a value. I get it, but you have to bite the bullet and just say they're never going to get me what I'm going to get for them right now.
Yeah. So, the show's called Dynasty Compass, and I use the compass as a metaphor for navigation and going in certain directions. And in that metaphor, the West is for the win now teams. These are guys who are throwing everything they have at going after that trophy right now, even if it means several years of a painful rebuild is coming. The strategies that we're talking about to me don't really fit that mold, because you really don't want to give up production today for something later, because you've thrown everything at this moment. But the North, the true North, those are where the perennial contenders are. And this to me is a perfect kind of perennial contender strategy. You are extending that contention window out another year or two or three by moving some of these assets, and you have the kind of a lineup that can afford to let an Achane go in what could be an RB1 season for him, so that you can bring in a Travion Henderson who a year or two will do fine for you now, but you say a year or two from now, he may be in that RB1 territory. And you also picked up a 2027 first and a 2028 second, let's say, and you can either use those or flip those for other assets as well. So the sophistication that's here is really not for every kind of team. I think would you agree with that, or do you say no? Even if you are a win now, this is something you should be pursuing?
I mean, I always say that you can definitely tier off of guys for production and still have a future and win the league. It's very possible, if you make these moves. Like I traded T. Higgins for Luther Burden in the second last year, and I got roasted for it. I think that everyone said you just traded T. Higgins for 2 seconds. And I think, it still offered, like I started Luther Burden in a playoff game last year. And I think that he was more consistent down the stretch for me than T. Higgins would have been. I don't think that it's going to look pretty or look that way immediately, but you can definitely have productive teams. You can definitely do this as a contender. And there's also the format of these tiered trades don't necessarily have to be for better players. You can take, somebody that is in that, like a Jameson Williams, and trade him for Devontae Adams and a second. You can take these younger guys and trade them for older productive vets and then picks on top, and you can still get production. And I know it's going to be short-sighted production, but you're going to insulate that trade with the picks, and hopefully you can replace, that's like the beautiful ecosystem of Dynasty, because sometimes these trades are blind. If you trade A.J. Brown for Mekhi Lemon plus, you're really just like hoping and praying that Mekhi Lemon hits, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to make blind trades like that. You have to trust your process. And if you don't have a process, you have to follow people that do have a process. But then you have to look at team breakdowns. You have to look at the fact that, A.J. Brown was moved because they took Mekhi Lemon, and there was a plan in place that Philly had, and understand, that there was this plan all along, that they said, Mekhi Lemon's here, we're going to grab him. That makes A.J. Brown expendable. That tells me that he's going to be a big part of the future, and that he's going to be maybe a big part of the immediate future, honestly, because he's going to probably slide in and be the wide receiver 2 of that team immediately. Right. But if you have an aging roster and you want to kick the tires and see, if this guy wants points and he's sick of Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brian Thomas Jr., hey, you know what I mean? So try to take a Devontae Adams and whoever, whatever you want to add on top of that, maybe a couple other productive pieces and send them over for these wide receivers. I'm okay with that. And then you look at contract breakdowns with Nico Collins, like I mentioned. Nico Collins probably isn't on the Texans long term. Jaden Higgins flashed 600 yards as a rookie. He's Nico Collins Jr. at this point. He has the same skill set. I'll go for a guy like that. I'll target Jaden Higgins late in a draft or as a throw-in in a trade, somebody that is undervalued. There's undervalued guys everywhere, Josh Downs. I mean, they let Michael Pittman walk, and we still saw him have a very productive year last year. And the fact that, he's so late in ADP still tells me that people aren't valuing the way that he should be valued. I think that he's a good throw-in. He's somebody, so really there's like many things that you can look at, but I think that, looking at the way that teams are looking next year, you have to guess that, the way that it's been looking for Nico Collins, they're not going to sign him to a long-term deal. I think that, Stroud might not even be on a long-term deal there. I think there's a lot of volatility. I'll take the guy that's cheaper.
I love that you mentioned the plan in place that you see for teams. You're talking about Mekhi Lemon going to Philadelphia, that, there is a succession plan. There was already one ready to go, essentially, for A.J. Brown, and you just hit it with Nico Collins in Houston. I also love that you mentioned the sort of third-year players who can flash, because a lot of people have lost patience with them. And you named, I think, two of the poster children, and Brian Thomas and Marvin Harrison. I might throw Matthew Golden on that pile as well. I'm not as high on him as I am the other two, but he is another kind of I guess I would consider him more, and you can say how you view him. I see him as one of those pluses to me, not necessarily a target I'd go after, but somebody I'd like to get thrown into a deal as I tear down for a different asset and say, okay, if a 2027 first is a mountain too high, how about Matthew Golden in a second?
Yeah, I like that. I think that Matthew Golden is in that mold of Jaden Higgins, where, you're looking at a team breakdown. Josh Dobbs is gone. Dontavian Wicks is gone. Jaden Reed is a part-time player there. I think Matthew Golden is going to get, 80 to 90% of the snap share next to Christian Watson. The opportunity is there. You want to go for opportunity. You want to go for newfound opportunity. Matthew Golden, Jaden Higgins probably is going to be on the field a lot more with Christian Kirk gone. And then you're looking at, Josh Downs with Michael Pittman gone. He's probably going to be a full-time wide receiver finally after, I think he's a year 4 guy. So I think, he's not quite a year 3 guy, but like he's finally going to be a full-time player. And that I'm excited for that. I am.
Yeah.
And I think that these are the guys that you want to go for in some trades.
Is there a point that's too late? Yeah, I assume it's before the market has already fully reacted. But when did you miss your window?
Well, I think that, the market is dictated by ADP, and ADP is dictated by groupthink at this point. I think that a lot of that is, players getting bumped up because of situations, getting bumped up because of videos dropping or coaches talking. You know what I mean? Like everything can shift. Somebody's traded. Immediately the guy behind them is valuable. Somebody's injured. Immediately the guy behind them is valuable. I think that there are windows to sell, but ultimately you have to sell and make a gamble. Like for instance, when you have a handcuff running back, you have Will Shipley, but also it's before Tank Bigsby's on the team and Barkley goes down. You have to make the gamble. There are certain guys where people are like, oh, Zamir White, I can't trade him for a second. Like, you know what I mean? Isaac Guerrero, when CMC was injured, everyone was like, hold on to Guerrero. He's the future. You definitely make these gambles where you can't, if you're holding on to these dynasty assets, Guerrero is zero at this point.
Yep.
These guys are zero. Will Shipley is a drop. All these guys that you could have gotten thirds, sometimes seconds, like you pretty much have to trust your process.
What were the sorts of lessons that you learned from those times that you waited too long that you're now able to put into practice and see maybe a little bit better what these windows look like?
Well, I think, I have a love affair with a Russian quarterback. I think that I always value quarterbacks that have their feet and can scoot. And I fell victim to Trey Lance and to Justin Fields. And, I think that Anthony Richardson spoke to me. And I am now kind of over that process. But I think holding on to priors is something that I struggled with mightily when I was coming into fantasy football, and saying that Trey Lance is better than Brock Purdy, and that he got the DC, and that he was traded for multiple firsts and all this stuff. Like I couldn't grasp the fact that he wasn't going to get his opportunity. I think that that's the biggest takeaway from missed opportunities. I could have traded Justin Fields for multiple firsts. I could have traded Trey Lance. I could have not taken him in the first. And, there's so many things that you look back on and say, you definitely had a type and you absolutely fell for it every single time, because the idea of getting a Jalen Hurts or, a Lamar Jackson and these guys weren't valued. I can tell you right now, I've been in Dynasty for a long time. I got Jalen Hurts in the second. I got Lamar Jackson in the second. I got these guys where you would get a Justin Fields. Ideally, that's really what I held on to for a long time. And I don't know. There's lessons learned. And I think that, you have to adjust. But there are teams out there that I still have Justin Fields, and I think that I still have Trey Lance in a couple leagues at this point. And it's just a friendly reminder that, you're not going to always be able to sell, and that's okay. You're not going to hit on sells. You're not going to hit on buys all the time. The best piece of advice I can give somebody in Dynasty is make the losses more important than the wins, because ultimately you're going to keep your priors longer if you just forget about them and don't hold on to them.
I think that's great advice for dynasty managers, for life, for fantasy analysts and content creators, touts who are trying to come up in this industry, is to, really embrace when you're wrong, because that's when you learn. That's when you get better. This is the lesson I learned from JJ Zachariason. It makes me, I think, more human as an analyst. I don't always get this right. I make lots of mistakes. I get lots of things right. I was right about Anthony Richardson, for example. I was not right about Justin Fields.
Yeah. Hey, he had a couple weeks last year.
Yep.
the reality is, we see second, third chances for quarterbacks in the NFL right now. The Sam Darnolds, the Genos, the Baker Mayfields. These guys, I don't think it's ever, too late as far as quarterbacks go. They always usually get a second chance, especially if they were drafted in the first round.
Yeah.
I think that somebody will always roll the dice at some point.
Yeah, I mean, in super flex formats, you can have a really excellent career for a very long time as a backup quarterback who you have down that roster because at some point your starter's out and this guy's available. Do you think there's a position where the tiering down approach works better than others?
I think that the wide receiver position is probably the easiest one to tier down from. I think that there is more linear production as wide receivers, because running backs, realistically, like there's top 10 and then there's a massive drop, but like for wide receivers, the wide receiver 8 and the wide receiver 15, there's not a big, huge difference. There's not like even tight ends in the same sense, off of the top 3. But once you get past the top 3, top 4, it's pretty much a straight line.
Who are some of the guys, we've probably talked about a few of them already, but who are some of the tier down swaps that you are either looking to make or think would be good moves for dynasty managers in the right circumstances with the right roster situations? Obviously, this doesn't always apply to everybody all the time.
I think that tier down guys, I like Emeka Egbuka for this, for dynasty in general, obviously, but I think that, with Mike Evans gone and Chris Godwin often injured and really just at an age where he's not consistent as far as health-wise goes, I just don't see him being a consistent guy for the entire year. I think there'll be moments where Emeka Egbuka, Jalen McMillan are pretty much running that offense, and I think that Emeka is going to be the alpha for Baker Mayfield, and I think that we're going to see a massive rise. So I think that the guys that I see exceeding their production are the ones that I want to target in this sense. I think that Zay Flowers with a healthy Lamar, we saw what he did last year. I think I have Zay Flowers as a big-time riser. I think that Zay Flowers will probably jump into like the Tetaroa McMillan stage. Like I think that he's in that second round area, maybe third round. I think that he's going to jump as a fifth, sixth round guy in Dynasty. I think that he could jump into the third round just because he did have that productive year last year. I think a lot of people are holding on to that productive year, but they want to see it again. They want to see, what he can do. And I think that, the Ravens will be fully healthy. Lamar will be fully healthy. And I think that's only going to, produce a bigger year for Zay Flowers. And there's guys that I will target like Ladd McConkey in these are all like third, fourth year guys, second year guys, like still young, still have the ceiling that they haven't hit yet. McDaniel offense with Ladd McConkey as the motion guy. I think I'm in on that. I want a piece of that for sure. If I'm going to tier down, who else is kind of on that list right now? I mean, there's also like Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle. These guys are falling into. I mean, Smith's not on a new team, but he is finally going to have an alpha role, and I think that he's going to exceed in that role. And I think that we're going to see a team of Smith and Mekhi Lemon, and he's finally going to be the big dog. And I think that he's going to jump a little bit. He's a little older. So I don't know if I would make that trade unless it made a lot of sense, but he's definitely somebody I could target. Jalen Waddle is somebody that his value hasn't jumped at all, but he got traded to be with Bo Nix. Bo Nix is, above and beyond anything that we're looking at Tua actually, has been for the last couple of years at this point. But, just the team in general, going from the Dolphins to the Broncos, I mean, he's going to have a massive year when it comes to production compared to what he used to be in Miami.
Yeah, you hit some of the guys who I really like this year. We'll just start with Waddle for a second, going to the pass happiest team in the league. McConkey, another one I really like. I had a spotlight piece on him in Football Guys a few weeks ago. Got one coming up on Flowers. It may not be out yet by the time this episode drops, but look for it shortly thereafter on Football Guys. It's another one that I think is underappreciated for the situation that they're in, the talent that they have, and the stars aligning in a way that they could, and not necessarily they will. I mean, Zay Flowers isn't guaranteed to be anything, neither is McConkey or any of the guys we're talking about. But these are pretty good bets, and I'm willing to be wrong on these kind of bets. I really like all the guys that you mentioned there.
Yeah, and these tiered down options aren't going to be like for the Jamar Chases and the Jackson
Right.
Smith and Jigbas or Pukas, but like if you have a George Pickens, maybe a George Pickens for one of these guys with a plus, or Nico Collins, one of these guys in a plus, I think that both of those guys are valued higher than the ones that we've been talking about. I mean, that you could throw Luther Burden in there as well. I think that. He's kind of jumped the shark a little bit in his value. I think that people, even now, like I think his value has exceeded like his outlook in Dynasty. But at the same time, if you can kind of get any of these guys, I like that. I'm looking at the board right now, and I'm seeing a lot of value that I would definitely move off of for some of these guys. Like even Tetsuroa McMillan. I don't believe in Bryce Young. I think that. You have to look at, his production probably being capped quite a bit in that offense, especially Jalen Coker signing a big contract. Well, not a big contract, but I mean, obviously for him, where he was drafted, I think that's a great contract for him. He'll be a big part of the offense. I think that he's kind of a sell right now, if we're talking about second-year guys. I think that he's probably stuck in the range that he's in, or he's going to drop a little bit, kind of like a Garrett Wilson after his first year.
Yep. Wilson's another one that a year ago I would have put on this pile. I don't know that you can get quite the same value for him now, given just the situation that he's in there in New York. Let's move over to running backs for a second and do the same sort of exercise. Now, this position, of course, is a lot more volatile. There's a lot less runway here, so you may have fewer guys that you're thinking of. But let's see. Let's look at your board and see who you might like here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it. I see that Travion Henderson. I think I mentioned him early in the pod. I want to trade for him. Chase Brown, I think, is somebody that is undervalued right now, and I think that he has the possibility of being a top 5 running back this year. So, if you're taking somebody like on a James Cook and you can get Chase Brown in a first or, something like that. I know that James Cook is still going to produce this year, but I also think that you could probably match his production with Chase Brown and get a free first on there. They both are at an age where they probably are going to be timed out on their contracts, and they will ideally get a second contract. I don't want to go for somebody like Tuin or Jadarian Price just because, there isn't short production there. You don't really know how that's going to play out. I mean, ideally, you could get a Jadarian Price, and I'm not going to tear off of a top guy for him, but a Kenneth Walker for Jadarian Price plus, or, Kenneth Walker is kind of a sell. Kenneth Walker is probably the biggest sell in running back for me, just because he's got this perceived value bump, and I always say going from Seattle to the Chiefs isn't the biggest value bump that the fact that he was a featured role. I know that he wasn't getting the usage that people wanted, but that was by design. I think that they understood if they used Walker to the extent that people wanted him used, he probably wouldn't have been available when they needed him the most. And that's kind of, if people are expecting him to be an absolute workhorse, I'm going to tell you right now, it's never worked in his favor to be a long-term producer. He does get injured. He does need a little breather. He needs a running mate to actually be a productive guy in the NFL. So, I mean, just this year, I think that he could be a big-time producer. But at the same time, if you're telling me that I could trade him for Chase Brown or I can get a Travion Henderson for him, I'll probably do that. Keyshawn Judkins, any of these guys that are younger and probably going to produce similarly and then still have a longer NFL outlook as far as production goes. It's not pretty down here. Javonte Williams is definitely a target. but it depends on where we're going with that.
Yeah. Well, it's just that you going back to your, the team situation and contracts. I mean, Jerry Jones is not known for giving second and third contracts to running backs. So the fact that that was done suggests that these part of the plan for some time to come, and not just here's a reward for being really great this year. That's not the way Jerry operates.
No, I mean, that's exactly what it is. The fact that he got a long-term contract, we waited. Ezekiel Elliott could never really lock that in at that point, and then Pollard after him was never going to lock in a contract. So the fact that Javonte Williams was there for a year, I don't know if he's getting old or what it is, but I value that contract that he got for the Cowboys for sure.
And speaking of Pollard, his current team, I think Nick Singleton is a guy I would not move off of a high-end guy for, but he could certainly be a throw-in to a trade involving other people and other assets that are here. But that to me is a bet on, despite his lousy draft capital, that is a bet on potential volume in the future, because both Pollard and Spears are free agents after this season there in Tennessee. The offense may still be terrible, but he may be the guy who could be looking at 200 touches a year from now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Sneaky guys like Blake Corums. I like Blake Corum a lot as far as a target goes, just because – we saw what he did last year working within the same system and working with Kyren Williams. I think that becomes a closer split than people really want it to be. So I think at value, Blake Corum's definitely the guy I want in that backfield over Kyren Williams. But, you got to play the value game in that sense where, if you miss on Kyren Williams, I'm fine getting a piece of that McVay offense with Blake Corum, and I think that they're still – going to produce similarly. Honestly, I think that they are very close to the same player, with Blake Corum being a little more talented. But I think that Kyren Williams fits the system better, oddly enough. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but.
Do you see a world where you might trade Kyren Williams for Blake Corum plus?
Yeah, I would, honestly. I think that it's got to make sense. I see a world trading Kyren Williams for Kyle Monangai plus. I see a world trading him for, I don't know how deep I'm going right now. I don't think I would go Jonathan Brooks just because, I don't know. I believe in Jonathan Brooks, the talent. I just don't believe in Jonathan Brooks' health. And I don't know if we're going to see the Jonathan Brooks that we saw in college, or if it's going to be like a new vamped up, like kind of like a J.K. Dobbins type of situation with Jonathan Brooks. So I got to wait to see it. He's definitely a wait and see option. But yeah, if you're gonna send, Kyren Williams to me is worth a first. Honestly, like if I can get Blake Corum in a first, yeah, all day. I don't know what kind of plus I'm getting on Blake Corum, but they are significantly farther. They're probably about 6 or 5 rounds apart from each other. So, yeah, I make that deal. It's just got to make sense, because I'm not going to say that Kyren Williams isn't going to produce, but I have to at least make my league mates understand that they're going to have to pay a premium for somebody I took there,
Yeah, I completely understand there. Let's move on to one other thing on Brooks is about maybe I'm cooler on him than a lot of people are. The third reason to the two that you rattled off is one we've already talked about, which is the offense is just it's not good. And if we don't have faith in the passing game there, suddenly having a lot of faith in the running game to me is not a consistent viewpoint. So I even if Brooks is able to overcome his injury history and his lack of now playing time for several years, still on a crummy offense.
Yep, that's fair. I just talked about Tetairoa McMillan. So, I got to at least ride that take with you a little bit when you're talking about my hate for Bryce Young.
Let's move over to tight ends for a second. Any candidates that you see here? And it as you pointed out earlier, man, you've got you have your elite 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 guys, depending on where you want to draw that line. And then just sort of this jumble of people on a slowly declining slant from higher to lower. So there's probably a lot of jumping off points here that you could then just reinsert somebody a little lower. Any favorites you've got in this tight end group.
Yeah, I mean, of the top 4 guys, I want Tyler Warren. Honestly, I think that Tyler Warren is probably going to be the guy that benefits the most as far as the team breakdown goes. I mean, I talked about not having Pittman there. I think that a full year of Tyler Warren and a fully healthy Dimes is probably going to boost his value quite a bit, a little more than these 3 guys. I think that Brock Bowers might have the overall producer numbers, but he's not getting that much higher than he is right now.
Yep.
Trey McBride, I think that he's going to regress a little bit. He still could end up being the tight end 2 this year, but I think that he's not going to rise. Colson Loveland's also pretty high. I think Tyler Warren could rise a little bit. I think that's probably why I'm going to target him out of these 4 guys. Tucker Kraft is still a value. I think that we talked about Matthew Golden a little bit. In the same sense, Tucker Kraft is probably going to be Jordan Love's favorite target when he's healthy. Obviously we saw that last year when there was more target competition. Now think about it this year where there's less target competition. I think that Tucker Kraft is going to be that safety blanket that Jordan Love needs. Kyle Pitts is still a big-time value. I mean, Kyle Pitts is down there, and he is essentially, he finished as the tight end 2 or
3 last year. He was very high.
Yeah.
Very quietly, he was that high.
Yeah. And honestly, they didn't add anybody. I mean, if you were afraid of Zachariah Branch taking from Kyle Pitts, I don't know what to tell you. But, there is Drake London, there's Kyle Pitts, and maybe Tua is an upgrade from Penix. I think that I like Tua for Kyle Pitts a lot just because of his depth of targets, the way that he pretty much, his arm, caters to Kyle Pitts a little more. I think that Penix likes to huck it and chuck it a little more than Pitts will, or than Tua will. So, and then also the coaching changes over there. I think that he's just set up for success, and I'd probably have him in that Tucker Kraft range, and I think that he's not right now, which is, and then going either deeper, there's guys like AJ Barner and Isaiah Likely and, even Chigo Konkwo, like all these guys, I think are falling into a favorable Gunnar Helm. They're all falling into a favorable situation where, they are going to be like AJ Barner, for instance, like he could be the second option on that team. And I'm not worried about, sacrificial X's when it comes to tight end production at this point. And then Chig, I think that Chig could be the second option as well. And when I value late round tight ends, I want to tap the guys that could be the first or second option on their team, just because you want the guaranteed targets, you want the guaranteed usage. That's what these guys are probably going to offer. I don't know who's going to break out and be the second option aside from Terry McLaurin, and they could still sign a vet. But right now, Chig is probably going to be the second option for Jaden Daniels-led offense. And then rookie tight end Kenyon Sadiq is still a value. I mean, I know that everyone gets that Jets taste in their mouth and they really can't look past it. But you know what? He's got the DC. He was drafted so high, and they took him first. And the fact that, he has that jackknife, that skill set, that kind of, you can line him up anywhere on the field. I think they're going to use him a lot. I think that he's going to be absolutely on the field full time. And just that alone, if you're going to get a guy like in round 10 that, and especially in Dynasty at the tight end position, that's at least going to come in as a rookie and be on the field, 80%, 90% of the snaps. I want that guy. I don't know. I know that they're not going to be a productive offense, but still, I want to at least target 1 or 2 guys in that offense. They're going to throw the ball to somebody.
I'm with you on Sadiq, actually, and that will surprise some people who've been following me because I've been down on him since he's not been my tight end 1 in that class ever. But it's because I didn't want to pay a mid-first round rookie pick for him. I'm now interested in acquiring him as now that he's in the player pool with everybody else. He suddenly, I think, is appropriately priced for where I value him. And I'm with you in that. I think he's a longer-term project for me, but definitely the talent's there. Who are some of the quarterbacks? And I'm assuming Superflex here. To me, in 1 QB, there isn't really much reason to be in a lot of trades for quarterbacks because there's plenty of startable options out there all the time. But in Superflex, there aren't any. So who are some of the quarterbacks you're chasing?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, quarterbacks are so readily available this year. In past years, it was kind of difficult, but this year I find myself waiting on quarterback, and especially in a startup, they're really going much later. I think that even in Superflex, you can wait on guys and still get viable starters. I think I don't even have to go up top. I still like Bo Nix, honestly. Trevor, if we're talking about immediate risers, I'll still take Caleb Williams at the back end of the first. I like Caleb Williams, but if I'm going to go a little farther down, Trevor Lawrence is somebody in the third round that I want to grab. Absolutely somebody that I see after last year, the way that he ended. I think the second year of Liam Cohen is only going to expand him and pretty much just like put him on the map as that generational quarterback that everyone said, oh, Trevor Lawrence, wait for Trevor Lawrence. I think they're finally unlocking him. And I want a piece of him. I want to take him where he is. Bo Nix, he's got the injury discount. I want Bo Nix too, honestly. I think that Bo Nix is definitely a value where he is. Brock Purdy, going down even farther. Cam Ward, I see rising up. Tyler Shuck is definitely somebody that I want a piece of. They're only expanding that offense, and I think that he's set up for success. They're kind of telling me that he's their guy, and they're going to build around him, which is nice to see. And then Kyler Murray, I'm taking the chance on Kyler Murray. He's throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, the ghost of TJ Hawkinson. I think that there's still going to be a big time jump in value, and he's still got some legs. Tua is down there, and I like Tua at value. Tua is even in Superflex ADP in the 12th, 13th round. So if you wait on QB3, Tua is absolutely the big time tap that I want. Outside of that, it's pretty much tough sledding. Mac Jones, I want Mac Jones at value. He's in the 17th, 18th round. I think Mac Jones is going to fit the mold of what we saw with, like these guys drafted in the first round that get their second chances. I think Mac Jones after this year is probably on a new team and probably starting somewhere, or at least being a bridge quarterback to boost his value a little bit. He's definitely a target for me if I'm just like trying to grab any type of value. And then there's our guy Justin Fields down here, and you go even farther. Deshaun Watson, maybe he wins that starting. I don't know. I'm not going for it, but I can see the vision if somebody wants to grab him in the 19th round.
Yeah, one of my blind spots in fantasy is I have kind of what I call the no knuckleheads policy, and so Watson's sort of out for me just on that basis. I don't think he'll ever be QB1 level production again, but I need people I can cheer for on my roster, and unfortunately he's not one of those kinds of people. So I think I do have him in a couple of deeper Superflex leagues where you if you don't play quarterbacks, you're out basically. So, but he's sitting there just as a hold my nose and play him if that's all I've got.
Fair,
some leagues it is. Well, let's kind of move back a little bit. We've been sort of down in the weeds with a lot of players. So as we're coming into the finish line here, what would be your best piece of advice for dynasty managers when it comes to being comfortable with trading away a producing player now for a lower tiered guy, maybe same production, maybe not, maybe it's a bet, maybe you're taking a chance, maybe somebody like McKylen, and we haven't even seen them on the field yet. We don't know what they're ultimately going to be. What's your advice for dynasty managers to turn them from, passive, looking at the players they have and liking them, to being aggressive about a tear down strategy?
I think that doing your homework is important. I would never go and make a trade because I saw some post and say, hey, go trade for Mekhi Lemon and trade these players for him. I think that a lot of people are influenced by certain managers or certain content creators that just tell you to do this. And I think, don't be reactive and don't jump into something without doing your research first. So I think that ultimately you do have to look at it from a value lens, you have to look at the players that you're trading for and understand that there's a lot of different avenues that you can go for when assessing this player value. But once you understand that, I think that, you do have to jump in the pool every once in a while, and you have to essentially not be scared of the cold water. And when you make these trades, I think that, you do have to cover your bases, understand that you've done your research, feel good about it. I would never tell you to just do a trade, just to trade. I think that there has to be a reasoning, there has to be a vision, there has to be a process behind everything that you do. And I think you can always refine it, you can always develop it, you can always figure out ways to make it better. But you do have to just make the plunge every once in a while. And there's no way to just tell you to do that besides, do your homework, make sure that you feel good about it, and understand that it's not going to always look good. Sometimes things that look good end up looking bad. Sometimes things that look bad end up looking good. Dynasty is so long. Like I told you early in the pod, Dynasty will exist when we're gone, and it'll keep going. This is not a game that just ends. Unfortunately, there are situations where Dynasty leagues end, but ultimately, the concept of Dynasty lives on forever. So it's like, I don't think that you should ever regret a trade immediately. You have to look at it in a 3-year window. If you go back on a trade after 3 years and it still doesn't look good, I'm sorry, brother. It didn't work out.
Yep.
But you have to understand that these things aren't immediate. You have to let it mature, develop, and grow. And I think that being patient is probably the best thing that you can do. And there's a lot that I could tell you about, what you can do to fully embrace this concept. But really, it's not something that you can just be told to do. You have to be ready for it. You have to understand it. And it's not something you're going to be willingly able to do until you do fully understand it. So give it some time.
Well, Mike, thanks so much. This has been an awesome conversation. That's some great advice to close on. But before we do close out, let everyone know where they can find you and the outstanding work that you do in the fantasy space.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Jeff. I can't tell you how much it's been nice to really just kind of open up and talk Dynasty with you. But so I am Dynasty Degens, and we are merged with Dynasty Rewind. So you can find all of our YouTube content over on Dynasty Rewind YouTube. You can jump into our Discord, which is Dynasty Degens. You can DM me. I can send you that over. We are on all audio platforms, and we do the Dynasty Show live every Thursday, and we have the Devi Show going every Monday and Mock Mondays, and there's just a lot of content flowing right now, and it's really fun. And if you are looking for rankings or Dynasty help, you can always DM me. I can send you over the links, and I can set you up. So don't be shy. My Twitter is at NerdBoi Takes, and then my pod Twitter is at Dynasty Degens. So any of those, the DMs are always open.
All right. And take advantage of that, guys, because I know Mike is really good about answering those kinds of questions and enjoys trying to help you out and make you a better manager and win your league or get ready to win it in a future year if this one is not in the cards for you. So thanks so much for being here, and thank you for watching or listening. Please do us a favor and like and subscribe, and go over to Apple and leave a 5-star rating and a really nice review. All of those things really help this show to grow. And another way you help it grow is by tuning in next week for the next great episode of Dynasty Compass.